There is a kind of silence that sounds like an apology. Not the silence of peace. Not the silence after a good cry, or the silence of two people who love each other so completely they don't need to fill the air with words. I mean the other kind. The silence that comes before the word sorry, that half-second of held breath where a person swallows themselves whole before anyone else even asks them to. I lived in that silence for 24 years. I had been apologizing for my existence for as long as I could remember. The word sorry lived on my tongue like a permanent resident, not a guest, not a visitor, but someone who had moved in without asking and paid no rent. It was always ready to escape before I could stop it, before I even knew it was coming. I said it for everything. For breathing too loudly in a quiet room. For having opinions that differed from someone else's. For wanting more than what people were willing to give me. For needing anything at all, food, rest, comfort, attention, love. By the time I reached 24, the habit had become as automatic as blinking, as natural as breathing in and out. I didn't even notice I was doing it anymore. It was simply who I was. The girl who was always sorry. My name is Lila Harper, and this is the story of how I finally stopped apologizing for taking up space in my own life. It is not a dramatic tale of revenge, or fireworks, or a single grand gesture that fixed everything overnight. It's quieter than that. It's the story of a slow awakening, of one conversation that cracked something open in me, and of the long, unglamorous, sometimes agonizing process of reclaiming a voice I had given away, piece by piece, apology by apology, for most of my life. If you've ever caught the word sorry halfway out of your mouth for something that needed no forgiveness, stay with me. This one is for you. I don't remember when I first started saying sorry. It was probably before I could form complete sentences, before I even understood what the word meant. I was a sensitive child, attuned to the moods of the adults around me in a way that made me hypervigilant, a small radar constantly scanning the room for storms. I learned early that making myself small was the safest way to exist. When I was too loud, I was told to be quiet. When I was too curious, I was told to stop asking questions. When I wanted something, I was told to wait. And somewhere in that waiting, I learned to apologize for wanting anything at all. My mother was a good woman. I want to say that clearly, because this isn't a story about blame, it's a story about inheritance. She was exhausted, not cruel. She worked 2 jobs to keep a roof over our heads after my father left when I was 6 years old, walking out on a Tuesday morning with a suitcase and a version of the truth that made it sound like it wasn't really his fault. My mother didn't have the energy left over for my emotions, my needs, my endless questions about why the sky was blue or why Daddy didn't call on my birthday. She loved me, I knew that, even then, in the marrow of my bones. But she loved me from a distance, from behind a wall of exhaustion and quiet resentment that I, being a child who didn't yet understand the difference between someone else's pain and my own worth, internalized as my fault. "Sorry, Mommy," I would say when I accidentally woke her up from a nap on the couch, her body curled protectively around itself like she was still trying to shield something. Sorry, when I couldn't find my shoes and made us late for the bus. Sorry, when I got a B instead of an A, as if the letter itself were a personal betrayal of her sacrifice. Sorry, when I cried after my father forgot my 9th birthday, and she had to explain, again, why Daddy wasn't coming, her voice flat with the effort of not breaking in front of me. I remember one evening in particular. I must have been about 7. I had drawn a picture, a family of 4, even though we were only 2, because in my mind the family I drew was the family I wished for. I brought it to my mother, holding it out like an offering. She glanced at it for a second, her eyes tired and far away, and said, "That's nice, baby. Can you put it away? I've got a headache." I remember the exact way my small chest folded inward, like a paper lantern losing its light. I remember saying sorry before I even understood what I was apologizing for. Sorry for drawing. Sorry for hoping. Sorry for bringing my joy into a room that had no space left for it. The apologies became a shield, though I wouldn't have used that word then. If I apologized first, maybe people wouldn't be angry. If I made myself small enough, maybe I wouldn't get hurt. If I was sorry enough, sorry in advance, sorry in general, sorry for simply being present, maybe someone would finally stop, look at me, and see me. They never did. Not because they were bad people, but because a person who is constantly apologizing teaches the world that they don't need to be noticed. We train people, without meaning to treat us the way we treat ourselves. And I had trained everyone around me to see me as background noise, pleasant, quiet, easily forgiven, easily forgotten. By the time I reached adulthood, the habit was no longer a habit. It was architecture. It was the load-bearing wall of my entire personality. I said sorry for taking up space in rooms, physically shrinking my shoulders when I walked past someone in a hallway, apologizing to furniture I bumped into as if the coffee table had feelings I might have hurt. I said sorry for having opinions that differed from others, softening every disagreement into a question, every I think into I don't know, maybe, sorry, but. I said sorry for wanting more than what people were willing to give me, as if my desires were an imposition on their generosity. And especially, I said sorry for needing anything at all. I apologized for my emotions, as though grief and joy alike were inconveniences I should have kept to myself. I apologized for my ambitions, as though wanting a bigger life was a kind of theft. I apologized, in the quietest and most devastating way, for my own existence. I became an expert, a true artisan, at shrinking myself to fit into whatever space people were willing to give me. Give me a shoebox, and I would fold myself into origami. Give me a doorway, and I would become a shadow that slipped through sideways. I met Ryan my junior year of college, in a crowded lecture hall that smelled like burnt coffee and ambition. He was handsome in an effortless, magazine cover kind of way, the kind of handsome that made people assume he was also kind, because we've been trained to believe beauty and goodness travel together. He was charming in public, quick with a joke, generous with compliments in front of an audience. But in private, behind closed doors where no one else could see, he was emotionally distant, like a lamp that only turned on when someone else was in the room to admire the light. He worked in pharmaceutical sales and liked coming home to a clean apartment, a warm meal already plated, and a girlfriend who never made waves. I had shaped myself to fit that preference perfectly, the way water takes the shape of whatever container it's poured into. I didn't even realize I was doing it. I thought it was love. I thought it was what a good partner did. "Sorry I'm late from class," I'd say, even when I wasn't late, even when I had left the lecture hall at a dead sprint just to shave 2 minutes off my arrival time. "Sorry the pasta is a little overcooked," I'd say, even when it was perfect, even when I had followed the recipe with the precision of a surgeon. "Sorry I'm talking so much about my project," I'd say, even when he'd been the one to ask, his question now somehow my fault for answering too enthusiastically. "Sorry I want to go see my family this weekend," I'd say, even when I hadn't seen them in months, as though wanting to hug my own mother required his permission and his forgiveness. "Sorry for crying during that argument," I'd say, even when his words had cut into me like a blade dragged slowly across skin, leaving a wound I would apologize for bleeding. I said it so frequently, so relentlessly, that Ryan had stopped responding to it altogether. In the beginning, he might have said it's okay, babe, with something like tenderness. But over time, my apologies became wallpaper, a pattern he no longer registered, a sound he had learned to tune out the way you tune out traffic outside your window. He would simply grunt, or say it's fine, in the flat tone of a man dismissing a fly, and move on with his evening. I told myself this was normal. I told myself that love meant making yourself smaller so the other person could feel comfortable, could feel big, could feel like the sun in a solar system where I orbited quietly and asked for nothing. I told myself my constant apologies were just politeness. Just consideration. Just being a good partner. But deep down, underneath the performance, I was exhausted. Bone deep, soul-crushing exhausted, the kind of exhaustion that sleep cannot fix, because it isn't the body that's tired. It's the self. 3.5 years I spent with Ryan. 3.5 years of making myself smaller, quieter, more convenient, as though I were furniture being sanded down so it wouldn't scratch anyone who brushed past it. 3.5 years of swallowing my needs and desires because expressing them felt too dangerous, too risky, too likely to end in the one thing I feared more than my own erasure, being left again. I remember the first time I truly understood something was wrong, not just uncomfortable, not just tiring, but wrong in a way that had teeth. I had just received a significant promotion at work, a marketing coordinator position at a mid-sized agency downtown, the kind of role I had been quietly, desperately hoping for since my first week as an intern. I rushed home that evening, my heart a hummingbird in my chest, practically vibrating with excitement. I hadn't felt joy like that in longer than I could remember, pure, uncomplicated, mine. "Guess what?" I said, bursting through the door, my coat still half on, my keys still in my hand. He was on the couch, laptop balanced on his knees, his brow furrowed in concentration at something on the screen, an email, a spreadsheet, something that mattered more than the sound of my voice. "What?" he asked, not looking up. "I got the promotion. Marketing coordinator. They announced it this afternoon. There was a whole presentation, and my boss said, 'That's great, babe,'" he interrupted, still not looking up, his fingers still moving across the keyboard. "Can we talk about this later? I'm in the middle of something." The words deflated me like a punctured balloon, all my joy hissing out through some tiny, invisible hole. I stood there in the doorway, coat half off, arms slowly wrapping around myself as if I could hold in whatever was leaking out. I wanted him to be proud of me. I wanted him to leap off that couch and spin me around the living room. I wanted him to ask a single follow-up question. Instead, I was an inconvenience, a distraction from whatever glowed on his screen, more important than the biggest professional victory of my life. "Sure," I said quietly, my voice already retreating into its familiar smallness. Later. Later never came. He worked until midnight that night, and by the time he finally crawled into bed, I was already asleep, or pretending to be, my back turned toward his side of the mattress. The next morning, he left early for a client meeting, keys jingling, coffee in hand, a peck on my forehead that felt more habitual than affectionate. My promotion was never mentioned again. Not that night. Not that week. Not ever. I didn't confront him about it. Of course I didn't. I didn't even fully acknowledge the hurt I felt, not even to myself. I simply filed it away, added it to the growing, invisible pile of small disappointments I was too afraid to address, each one a pebble I swallowed rather than a stone I threw. Confrontation meant risking the relationship, and I wasn't willing to risk it. Not when I had invested so much of myself, my time, my youth, my softened edges, into making it work. By the 3rd year of our relationship, I had become an expert at invisibility. I knew exactly how to exist in Ryan's space without ever being an inconvenience, the way a ghost learns to walk through a house without disturbing the dust. I kept the apartment spotless, wiping down counters that were already clean simply to have something to do with my hands. I prepared his favorite meals, memorizing his preferences the way other people memorize scripture. I managed his schedule, his dry cleaning, his mother's birthday. I provided emotional support whenever he needed it, staying up late to listen to his complaints about work, nodding in all the right places, all while making myself completely unobtrusive, completely low maintenance, completely easy to love in the way that costs the other person nothing. I told myself this was partnership. This was what couples did. They supported each other, adjusted to each other, made each other's lives a little easier. But the truth, when I finally let myself look at it, years later, in the unflinching light of hindsight, was simpler and far more devastating. I was terrified of being alone. Terrified that if I ever stopped being useful, Ryan would leave, the way my father had left, the way people always seemed to leave when the shine wore off. Terrified that no one else would want the raw, unedited version of me, opinions and needs and inconvenient emotions and all. Terrified, at the deepest root of it, that I simply wasn't enough on my own, that my worth was something I had to earn through usefulness rather than something I was simply born owning. So I stayed. I kept giving. I kept apologizing. I kept hoping that if I loved him enough, if I was patient enough, quiet enough, undemanding enough, he would eventually love me back the way I so quietly, desperately needed to be loved. He never did. Not because he was a monster. Ryan was, in his own limited way, a man who genuinely believed he loved me. But he had never once been asked to stretch himself for anyone, and I had never once required him to. I had made loving me so effortless, so frictionless, that he mistook the absence of friction for the presence of happiness. The turning point came on an ordinary rainy Thursday evening, in my night literature class at the local community college. I had enrolled in the class to finally finish the degree I had put on hold when I met Ryan, one of those small, quiet dreams I had shelved for now, which had somehow stretched into years. The classroom smelled like wet umbrellas and old carpet, fluorescent lights humming overhead, rain tapping insistently against the windows like it wanted to be let in. Professor Elena Ramirez, a sharp-witted woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and reading glasses perpetually pushed up into it, was facilitating a passionate discussion on Virginia Woolf's essays about women's voices and creative freedom. She had a way of pacing when she talked, like the ideas were too big to be contained by standing still. Woolf argues that women have been systematically silenced throughout history, Professor Ramirez said, chalk dust on her fingers, her voice carrying easily to the back row. That our creative potential has been stifled by societal expectations, by the constant demand that we be smaller, quieter, more accommodating. How does that resonate with you today? I raised my hand. My heart was racing before I even knew what I was going to say. I had been thinking about this all week, about the ways I had silenced myself in my relationship with Ryan, about the constant apologies that had become my second language, more fluent to me than my own native tongue. I think it's not just about creative freedom, I said, my voice trembling but audible. I think it's about the basic freedom to exist without apology. The freedom to take up space, to have needs, to express emotions without being seen as difficult or demanding. Women are taught from childhood that we need to be convenient. That our value lies in how little we require from others. The class was quiet. I had never spoken so openly before, not even to myself. And when we do need something, I continued, something loosening in my chest as the words kept coming, we apologize for it. Sorry for needing help. Sorry for being too much. Sorry for wanting more. We say it so often we don't even notice anymore. It's just who we are. I finished, and immediately the familiar panic rushed in like water through her cracked hull. I had said too much. I had been too honest, too raw, too visible. I had exposed myself in a way that felt genuinely dangerous, like I had walked outside without my skin. Sorry, I added quickly, my voice shrinking back down to its usual size. That might not make sense. Professor Ramirez paused mid-step, one hand still resting on the edge of her desk. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, a mixture of concern, recognition, and something like sadness, the particular sadness of someone watching another person do to themselves what was once done to her. Lila, she said gently. Can you stay after class for a moment? My heart dropped straight through the floor. I had done something wrong. I had said something inappropriate. I was going to be reprimanded, or worse, quietly encouraged to drop the class, to keep my inconvenient thoughts to myself where they belonged. I'm sorry, I said again, already gathering my bag, my pen, my dignity. I shouldn't have, it's okay, she said, cutting me off with a gentle smile that held no judgment in it at all. Just stay for a minute. The class ended. Students filed out, their chatter and the shuffle of backpacks filling the hallway, the rain still tapping steadily against the windows. I lingered at my desk, my hands clammy against my notebook, my stomach churning with a dread I couldn't quite name. Professor Ramirez walked over and sat on the edge of the desk beside mine, close enough that I could smell the faint scent of her chalk-dusted cardigan. She wasn't angry. If anything, she looked thoughtful, the way a doctor looks right before delivering a diagnosis they've suspected for a while. Lila, I want to ask you something, she said. Do you know how many times you said sorry during our 40-minute discussion tonight? I blinked, genuinely confused. What? I counted, she said, not unkindly. 14 times. 14 times you apologized for speaking, for having thoughts, for simply existing in the conversation. I stared at her, stunned into a silence that, for once, I didn't feel the need to apologize for filling. You're one of my brightest students, she continued, her voice steady, patient, the voice of someone who had clearly delivered this particular truth before, to other young women who had walked into her classroom already half erased. You have insight. You have creativity. But every time you open your mouth, you shrink yourself first with an apology. You diminish yourself before anyone else has a chance to. I don't want to be rude, I said weakly, the excuse sounding thin even to my own ears. Who taught you that expressing yourself was rude? She asked gently. Who taught you that taking up space makes you a burden? The question hit me like a physical blow, landing somewhere just beneath my ribs. No one had ever asked me that before. No one had ever even noticed there was a pattern to notice, let alone traced it back to its root. I don't know, I whispered, and it was the truest thing I had said all night. I've just always done it. Professor Ramirez nodded slowly, as if this were exactly the answer she had expected, the answer she herself might have given, once, a long time ago. I want you to try something for me, she said. Start noticing it. Start counting. And then, start stopping. She reached out and squeezed my hand, her grip warm and sure. You are not too much, Lila. You are not a burden. You are a brilliant, creative, thoughtful young woman who deserves to take up space in this world. Don't let anyone, including yourself, convince you otherwise. I don't remember driving home that night. I remember the wipers going back and forth across the windshield, and I remember crying, though I couldn't have told you exactly why, whether it was grief or relief or the strange vertigo of being truly seen for the first time in years. That night, I lay awake in bed next to Ryan, who was already snoring softly, utterly unaware that the woman beside him was quietly coming undone in the best possible way. I replayed the conversation again and again, turning it over like a stone I couldn't stop touching. 14 times. I had apologized 14 times in a single 40-minute conversation. 14 times in one classroom, one evening, one small slice of my life. How many times did I apologize in a full day? In a week? In a lifetime? The next day, I began counting. I carried a small notebook in my bag, the kind meant for grocery lists, and every time the word slipped out, I made a tally mark. By the end of the day, exhausted and a little shaken, I added it all up. 27 unnecessary apologies. 27 times, in a single ordinary Tuesday, I had diminished myself. Sorry I bumped into you, to a stranger in the coffee shop, even though he had been the one to step backward into my path. Sorry I'm taking so long, to the barista, though I had ordered in under 10 seconds. Sorry I'm so tired, to my coworker, as though exhaustion itself were an inconvenience I owed her an explanation for. Sorry I'm not more productive today, to my boss, though I had hit every deadline. Sorry I'm so stressed, to Ryan, apologizing for a feeling he himself had contributed to. Sorry for existing, not out loud, but in the quiet, private language I used only with myself, in the mirror, in the shower, in the dark. The realization felt like a quiet earthquake, not the kind that levels buildings, but the kind that shifts the foundation just enough that you notice, for the first time, that the house was never quite level to begin with. Something inside me shifted. I didn't make a dramatic announcement. I didn't declare a new policy to anyone. I simply decided, in the privacy of my own mind, to change. The first few days were incredibly difficult. The word sorry hovered on my lips constantly, like a ghost I had to keep swallowing back down before it could fully form. When I bumped into a stranger at the coffee shop, I almost said it. I felt the shape of it in my mouth, the muscle memory of decades. When Ryan sighed loudly because I was typing on my laptop late at night, I nearly apologized for disturbing him in our own shared home. Each time I caught myself, mid-syllable, I felt a strange, dizzying mix of anxiety and empowerment, like standing at the edge of a swimming pool for the first time in years, unsure if my body still remembered how to float. It was like learning a new language. A language where I didn't have to apologize for being a person. I started with small changes. Meaningful, but small. The kind of changes that don't look like much from the outside, but feel, on the inside, like moving a mountain one pebble at a time. At work, when my boss gave me vague feedback on a design project, the kind of feedback that used to send me into a spiral of self-blame, instead of saying, sorry, I'll fix it immediately, I took a breath and replied, thank you for the feedback. Can you clarify which parts you'd like me to adjust so I can deliver exactly what you need? My boss looked surprised, pleasantly so, her eyebrows lifting slightly. That's a good question, she said. Let me walk you through my thinking. For the first time in my professional life, I felt like a professional instead of an apology machine. I felt like someone whose time was worth clarifying, rather than someone who should simply absorb whatever vague criticism was handed to her and scramble to fix it in silence. In my classes, I raised my hand more often and stopped prefacing my comments with disclaimers. No more, this might be a dumb question, but, no more, I don't know if this is right, sorry. When a classmate interrupted me mid-sentence, something I had always simply allowed to happen, letting my thought trail off into nothing, I calmly continued speaking instead, my voice a little louder, a little steadier. It felt terrifying, every single time. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff and jumping, not knowing yet whether I could fly or whether I'd simply fall. But the more I did it, the easier it became. Not easy, never quite easy, but easier. The muscle, once atrophied from disuse, slowly began to remember what it was built for. At home with Ryan, the changes were more noticeable, and, predictably, far more uncomfortable for him. One Friday evening, I came home after a long day at the agency followed by class, my body heavy with the particular exhaustion of a person who has been giving pieces of herself away all day. Ryan was sprawled on the couch watching sports, a beer sweating on the coffee table beside him. "Hey, can you make dinner tonight?" he asked without looking up. I, who usually jumped up immediately, coat still on, bag still on my shoulder, already halfway to the kitchen before the sentence had even finished, took a breath instead. I let the silence stretch for a beat longer than was comfortable. "I'm pretty exhausted," I said. "Can we order something instead? Or maybe cook together?" Ryan muted the TV and frowned, turning to look at me properly for what felt like the first time in weeks. "Since when do you not want to cook?" "Since I've been pulling 12-hour days," I said, my voice calm but firm, surprising even myself with its steadiness. "I'm tired, Ryan. I've had a long week." He stared at me like I had grown a second head. "You okay? You've been acting weird lately." "I'm not weird," I said quietly. "I'm just stopping." "Stopping what?" I met his eyes. "Apologizing for existing." Ryan laughed, thinking I was joking, the sound of it a little too loud, a little too quick. But over the following weeks, as the small refusals piled up, a no here, a not tonight there, a boundary quietly but firmly held, he realized I wasn't joking at all. I stopped apologizing for wanting to spend time with my friends. When Ryan complained that I was going out too often, a complaint that, in the past, would have kept me home for weeks out of guilt, I didn't say sorry. I said, "I miss my friends. I need to maintain those relationships." I stopped apologizing for needing quiet time to work on my art, a hobby I had let wither for years because it took up too much time and space that apparently belonged, by unspoken agreement, to Ryan. When he complained that I was spending too much time in my studio corner of the apartment, I didn't apologize. I said, "This is important to me. It's part of who I am." I stopped apologizing for having emotions. When he dismissed my feelings with a wave of his hand or muttered, "You're overreacting," I didn't say sorry for being too sensitive. I said, "My feelings are valid. I need you to hear me." The first time I said that sentence out loud, "My feelings are valid," Ryan looked genuinely shocked, his mouth opening slightly before closing again with nothing to say. He wasn't used to me standing up for myself. He wasn't used to me taking up space in a room he had always, without ever saying so out loud, considered his. The tension in our relationship grew with every passing week, thickening the air between us like humidity before a storm. Ryan missed the version of me who smoothed everything over, who made his life frictionless, who absorbed every inconvenience so he never had to feel one. He tried to pull me back in subtle ways, sudden compliments that felt like bait, small gifts that arrived with strings attached, guilt trips about how distant I had become, how different, how hard to please I suddenly was. "You've changed so much," he said one night, sitting across from me at the kitchen table, his voice edged with something between accusation and genuine bewilderment. "You don't say sorry anymore. You don't put me first. It feels like I don't even know you." I looked at him, and for the first time in 3.5 years, I felt a strange, unfamiliar calm settle over me, not anger, not sadness, just a quiet, clear-eyed knowing. "Maybe you never really knew me," I said. Because I never really let you. Then came the family crisis that tested my new resolve in a way nothing else had. My younger brother, Ethan, was in a serious car accident on a rainy highway one Tuesday night, a truck hydroplaning into his lane, metal folding like paper, glass scattering across wet asphalt like ice. He suffered a broken leg, cracked ribs, and a concussion that kept him disoriented for days. The phone call came at 11:47 p.m., and I remember the exact way the floor seemed to tilt beneath me as my mother's voice, thin and shaking, said the word hospital. The hospital became my second home in the weeks that followed. I took time off work, drove my worried, frightened parents back and forth across town, coordinated with doctors and nurses and insurance representatives, and sat beside Ethan during painful physical therapy sessions, holding his hand while he gritted his teeth through exercises that made him cry out despite himself. I barely slept. I lived on hospital coffee that tasted like burnt cardboard and vending machine snacks eaten standing up in fluorescent-lit hallways. My body ached with a tiredness that had nothing to do with rest and everything to do with holding an entire family together with my bare hands. When I dragged myself home one night at 11 p.m., moving on autopilot, my body one long ache, Ryan was on the couch playing video games, the glow of the screen washing his face in blue light. "You've barely been here," he complained, not even pausing the game. "The apartment's a mess." The old me, the girl who apologized for breathing too loudly, would have immediately launched into a flurry of apologies. "Sorry, I know, I'll clean tomorrow, I'm so sorry, I know this isn't fair to you." I felt the shape of those old words rising in my throat, familiar as an old coat. But I took a deep breath instead, and let it out slowly. "My brother is in the hospital, Ryan," I said, my voice steady despite the exhaustion pulling at every syllable. "I'm doing the best I can. I need your support right now, not criticism." He blinked, finally pausing the game, finally looking at me. "Sorry, I just miss you." For a moment, the old me almost surfaced, the reflex was right there, ready to say it's okay, "I'm sorry too, I miss you too, I'm sorry for making you feel neglected." But I caught myself, right at the edge of the words, and pulled back. "I miss being here too," I said instead. "But right now, my family needs me. And I need to be there for them without feeling guilty about it." The silence that followed was heavy, thick enough to feel on my skin. Ryan didn't know how to respond to this new version of me, the version who didn't apologize for having needs, who didn't shrink herself smaller to make his discomfort more manageable, who could hold love for him and boundaries against him in the very same breath. 3.5 months after that conversation with Professor Ramirez, Ryan finally confronted me, really confronted me, not with passive sighs or muted complaints, but with the full weight of his frustration. He came home to find me packing a bag on our bed, folding shirts with the quiet efficiency of someone who has made up her mind. I was going to stay with my parents for a while to help with Ethan's recovery at home, now that he'd been discharged and needed round-the-clock help navigating stairs, medications, and the slow, grinding boredom of healing. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice sharp, standing in the bedroom doorway like a man guarding territory. "I'm going to help my family," I said calmly, not looking up from the shirt I was folding. "I told you this." "You've changed so much," he said again, the same tired refrain, his voice laced with frustration. "You don't say sorry anymore. You don't put me first. It feels like I don't even know you." I zipped the bag closed and turned to face him fully, meeting his eyes without flinching for what might have been the first time in our entire relationship. "You're right. I have changed," I said. "I stopped apologizing for having needs, for having boundaries, for taking up space in my own life. I spent years making myself smaller so you could feel bigger, Ryan." I apologized for everything, for my opinions, for my time, for my feelings. And you let me. You liked it that way. He looked hurt, genuinely wounded, his jaw tightening. I never asked you to do that. No, I said gently, and I meant it. But you never stopped me either. You never once told me I didn't need to shrink myself for you. The argument that followed was long and painful, words spilling out that had been dammed up for years, old resentments surfacing on both sides, but strangely calm on my end, calmer than I had ever imagined I could be in a moment like that. I didn't cry. I didn't apologize for hurting his feelings, even as I watched them crumple in real time. I simply spoke my truth, sentence by sentence, like laying down bricks. For the first time in our relationship, Ryan was the one left speechless. I stayed with my family for several weeks. I helped Ethan with his exercises, cheering him on through gritted teeth and small victories, 5 more steps, 10 more steps, a full lap around the living room. I cooked meals for my parents, who were still shaken and grateful in equal measure. And finally, in the pockets of quiet between caretaking, I allowed myself to rest, really rest, the kind of rest that reaches all the way down into the bones. In those quiet moments, I reflected on how much of my life had been filtered through apologies, how much of myself I had translated into a language of smallness before anyone had even asked me to speak. I started drawing again, bold, colorful pieces that expressed joy instead of guilt, wide unapologetic strokes instead of careful, timid lines. I finished my final semester strongly, submitting a portfolio I was, for the first time, genuinely proud of. I reconnected with old friends I had drifted away from while trying so hard to please Ryan, friends who welcomed me back without a single "where have you been," just open arms and the easy, forgiving rhythm of old friendship. One night, I sat in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by boxes of old memories, dust motes floating in the lamplight. I found a journal from when I was 16, its cover soft and worn from handling. On the first page, in my own careful, looping teenage handwriting, I had written, "I'm sorry for being so much trouble. I'm sorry for being so needy. I'm sorry for not being better." I looked at those words and felt tears prick my eyes, hot and sudden. The 16-year-old me had already learned to apologize for existing. She had already internalized the message that she was too much, too demanding, too difficult, a message no one had ever said to her directly, but one she had absorbed anyway, the way skin absorbs sunlight, the way lungs absorb smoke in a room where no one meant to start a fire. I took a pen and wrote underneath, my adult handwriting steadier now, "You are not too much. You were never too much. You were just a child who deserved to be loved unconditionally. And you still deserve that." I closed the journal and held it against my chest for a long time. 6 months after that pivotal conversation with Professor Ramirez, I stood on the graduation stage, diploma in hand, the late afternoon sun warm on my shoulders, my family somewhere in the crowd holding up a handmade sign with my name misspelled by my father's careful, unfamiliar handwriting. When it was my turn to speak briefly as a representative of my class, I didn't apologize for being nervous, though my hands trembled slightly against the podium. I spoke clearly about the power of finding one's voice, my voice carrying out over rows of folding chairs and proud, tear-streaked faces. I spent most of my life apologizing for taking up space, I said. I said sorry for having opinions. I said sorry for wanting more. I said sorry for simply existing. It took me a long time to realize that I didn't need to be sorry. I just needed to be myself. The audience applauded, a warm, rolling wave of sound that I let wash over me without flinching, without the old instinct to shrink away from attention. I saw Professor Ramirez in the front row, her hands pressed together, tears in her eyes. After the ceremony, cap still slightly crooked on my head, she approached me through the crowd of hugging families and flashing cameras. "I'm so proud of you, Lila," she said, taking both my hands in hers. "You stopped counting the apologies, and started counting your own worth instead." I hugged her tightly, the diploma crinkling slightly between us. "Thank you for seeing me when I couldn't see myself." As I walked out into the bright sunlight after the ceremony, my gown flapping gently in the breeze, my phone buzzed in my hand. A message from Ryan. "I miss the old you. Can we try again?" I read it twice, felt a familiar tug of guilt rise in my chest, uninvited but not entirely unexpected. But this time, and this, I think, was the real proof of how far I had come, I didn't apologize to myself for feeling it. I didn't berate myself for the pang of longing, the small ache of what if. I simply let the feeling exist, acknowledged it, and let it pass through me like weather. I put the phone away and kept walking toward my family, who were waiting with flowers and proud smiles, my mother already crying, Ethan leaning heavily on a cane but standing. The girl who once apologized for everything had finally learned the most important lesson of all. She was allowed to take up space, fully, loudly, and unapologetically. And the first person who truly noticed the change was the one who had never deserved her constant apologies in the first place. 3 years later, I'm a different person. Not completely, not magically, there is no fairy godmother in this story, no single moment that fixed everything forever. I still struggle sometimes. I still catch myself, every so often, about to apologize when I don't need to, the old reflex flickering like a phantom limb. But now I notice it. Now I stop myself, mid-syllable, and choose something else instead. I built a career I'm proud of, not just a job I'm grateful for, but a career I actively chose, shaped, and fought for. I've made friends who love me for who I am, not for how convenient I can be, friends who ask me hard questions and expect honest answers, who would rather have the real me, messy and complicated, than a polished, apologetic imitation. I've started painting again, truly painting, not just doodling in the margins of my life the way I used to, stealing minutes here and there like a thief in my own home. I've even exhibited some of my work in small galleries, my name printed on little white cards beside canvases that used to live only in my head. And I've learned to be okay with being alone. Not lonely, alone. There's a difference, one I didn't understand for most of my life. Loneliness is the ache of missing someone. Being alone is the quiet comfort of knowing you're complete on your own, that you don't need another person to complete a sentence you're perfectly capable of finishing yourself. I've dated a little. Nothing serious. I'm not ready for that yet, and this is the part that still surprises me most, that's okay. I don't have to apologize for the pace of my own healing. I'm learning to be the person I always needed someone else to be for me. I'm learning to be my own anchor, my own safe harbor, my own source of light on the nights when no one else is around to turn one on. I think about Professor Ramirez sometimes. She retired a year ago, trading her chalk-dusted cardigans for gardening gloves, but we still meet for coffee occasionally, sitting in the same corner booth of the same little cafe near the old campus. She told me once, stirring sugar into her tea, that I was one of her greatest success stories, not because of grades, she was quick to clarify, but because I learned to stop apologizing for being myself. Every woman needs to learn that lesson, she said, looking at me over the rim of her cup. And most of us learn it too late. There is one more scene I have to tell you about, because it is, in many ways, the quietest and most important one of all. It happened about 8 months after graduation, on an unremarkable Sunday morning. I was standing in front of the bathroom mirror in my new apartment, toothbrush in hand, half awake, when I caught my own reflection mid-motion and simply stopped. I don't know what made that particular morning different from any other. Maybe it was the light coming in through the small window above the sink, soft and forgiving. Maybe it was simply that enough time had passed, enough small victories had accumulated, that something in me was finally ready to look. I set the toothbrush down and studied my own face the way I might study a stranger's, the faint lines beginning to form at the corners of my eyes, the stubborn set of my jaw that I used to think made me look difficult, the way my eyebrows drew together when I was thinking hard about something, which people had once told me made me look intense, as though intensity were a flaw to be corrected rather than a kind of fire to be respected. For 24 years, I had looked at this face and seen a list of apologies waiting to happen. Sorry for the sharpness of my opinions written into the set of my mouth. Sorry for wanting too much written into the hunger behind my eyes. Sorry for taking up space written into the very shape of my presence in any room I entered. That morning, I looked at my reflection and, for the first time in my adult life, I didn't flinch. I didn't catalog my flaws. I didn't mentally draft an apology for existing in this particular body, with this particular face, taking up this particular amount of space in a world that had once made me feel I owed it a constant, quiet debt. I just looked. And I said, out loud, to no one but myself, in a small bathroom with bad lighting and a cracked towel by the tub, you don't have to be sorry anymore. It sounds like such a small thing, doesn't it? For words, spoken to a mirror on an ordinary Sunday. But healing rarely announces itself with trumpets. It arrives, more often than not, in bathrooms and kitchens and quiet cars at red lights, small, unwitnessed moments where the old wound finally, gently, closes. I cried a little, standing there, but it wasn't the same kind of crying I used to do after arguments with Ryan, or after my mother's tired dismissals, or after any of the thousand small moments where I had learned that my presence was something to be managed rather than welcomed. This was different. This was the kind of crying that comes after you've been holding your breath for so long you forgot you were doing it, and then, finally, you exhale. I finished brushing my teeth. I got dressed. I went about my ordinary Sunday, coffee, laundry, a phone call with my mother who was telling me, with unusual lightness in her voice, about a garden she'd started planting in the backyard, tomatoes and basil and a stubborn rosebush that refused to bloom no matter what she did. I listened to her without waiting for a gap to apologize into. I simply listened, the way people who trust they're allowed to take up space in a conversation listen, fully, without shrinking, without rehearsing my next apology while she spoke. It was such a small, unremarkable day. And yet I remember it more clearly than almost any other day of that entire year, because it was the day I finally, quietly, without fanfare, believed the thing Professor Ramirez had told me months before. You are not too much. You were never too much. I had heard those words before. That Sunday morning, standing in front of a cracked bathroom mirror with toothpaste still on my lip, I finally felt them. If you're reading this, and you recognize yourself in my story, in the reflexive sorry that jumps to your lips before you've even decided you need to say it, in the way you shrink your opinions into questions, in the way you apologize for crying, for wanting, for simply being present in a room, I want you to know something. You are not too much. You were never too much. You are not a burden. You are not a problem to be solved, a difficulty to be managed, an inconvenience to be smoothed over. You are a person. A full, complex, deserving person who has the right to take up space in this world, not eventually, not once you've earned it, not after you've apologized your way into deserving it, but right now, exactly as you are. You have the right to want things, to need things, to express things without a disclaimer attached. You have the right to say no. You have the right to say yes. You have the right to change your mind, as many times as you need to, without owing anyone a full accounting of why. The people who love you, truly love you, will never ask you to shrink yourself to fit inside their comfort. They will hold space for your full humanity, the messy, complicated, beautiful truth of who you are, apologies and all, but never apologies for who you are. And the people who ask you to be smaller? The ones who are more comfortable when you're quiet, more at ease when you're convenient, more affectionate when you're easy to overlook. They don't deserve you. They never did. Not because they're necessarily villains, some of them, like Ryan, are simply people who never learned to want more from love than the absence of friction. But their limitations are not your life sentence. I spent 24 years apologizing for being myself. I don't get those years back, no one does. That's the quiet grief tucked inside every story like this one. But I have the rest of my life to live unapologetically. And I intend to do just that, one small, unglamorous, daily choice at a time. I've stopped counting apologies. Now I count my worth. I'm sitting in my studio apartment, surrounded by canvases and paint and the soft golden glow of afternoon light slanting through the window. My latest painting is propped against the wall, still smelling faintly of wet acrylic, a woman standing on a cliff, arms open wide, face lifted toward the sun. She's not apologizing. She's not shrinking. She's just existing. Fully, completely, unapologetically, the wind pulling at her hair like it, too, wants to be part of her. My phone buzzes on the paint-splattered table beside me. A text from my mother. Ethan is walking without crutches now. The doctors say it's a miracle. We're so proud of how you helped him. I smile, setting down my brush. I'm proud of him too. Proud of all of us, of how far we've all come, stumbling and healing in our own separate, overlapping ways. Another buzz. A friend inviting me to a gallery opening downtown. I type back yes without hesitation, without checking an imaginary calendar of obligations, without weighing whether I've earned a night out. No apology for being busy. No excuse about not having time. Just yes, because I want to go, and that is, finally, enough of a reason all on its own. I look at the painting again. The woman on the cliff. I realize, with a small, quiet start, that it's me. It's who I've become. The girl who stopped apologizing. The woman who finally learned to take up space. The sun is setting outside my window, painting the sky in wide, unapologetic strokes of gold and pink, colors that don't ask permission to be beautiful. For the first time in my life, I feel completely at peace. The weight of all those apologies, 27 in a single day, 14 in a single conversation, thousands upon thousands over a lifetime, is finally, blessedly gone. I am free. I am allowed to take up space. Fully, loudly, and unapologetically. A note to you if you've made it this far, thank you. Thank you for reading my story. Thank you for being a witness to my journey. I don't know what brought you here, curiosity, recognition, a desperate need to feel less alone in a habit you didn't even know how to name. Whatever it was, I want you to know that you are not alone. There are millions of us out here, women and men alike, who were taught to apologize for existing, who are slowly, imperfectly, bravely learning to take up space instead. It's not easy. It's a daily practice, not a single decision made once and finished forever. Some days I fail. Some days I revert to old patterns and apologize for things that don't require apologies, the old reflex winning out over the new intention. But I always catch myself, a little faster each time. I always correct course. Because I deserve better. And so do you. So here's my challenge to you. For the next day, count how many times you say sorry. Not the real apologies, the ones where you've genuinely wronged someone and owe them a repair. Count the unnecessary ones. The ones where you apologize for having needs, for having opinions, for taking up space, for existing loudly in a world that quietly asked you to be smaller. And then, tomorrow, start stopping. It won't be easy. But it will be worth it. Because you are not too much. You were never too much. You are exactly enough. And you deserve to take up space. Thank you for spending this time with me. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, never let anyone dim your light. See you in the next one.